Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and game developers, obviously. My name is Vasil Nikolov, and I'm standing here in a pitiful attempt to try to put you into sleep for 30 minutes. So don't snort too loud. You can just push yourself to the body next side. So it's going to be easy to go through it like this. So I'm also hopeful to reach a conclusion towards the question that is behind me. I forgot to change my slide. Towards the question that was behind me, what kind of an animal is the game designer? And are we even relevant today? So, first, I need to start with a fair warning. And this is towards my ability of public speaking. I'm in no way fantastic public speaker. And in addition of speaking in nothing else than my native tongue, I'll probably make various mistakes in pretty much pronunciation, tenses, prepositions, or everything that makes this language understandable. So, if I do them, don't laugh too loud. We don't really want to scare the guys passing outside if there's anyone left out there. So, do forgive me for these errors, and let's proceed. So, many of you are wondering, okay, some of you are wondering, who the hell is this guy? So I'll try to be a bit brief about it. I've been a game designer for almost 10 years already. And for the time on this position, I've worked over multiple projects, pretty much exclusively on mobile. There were some successes and there were some failures, but failures are always the most vivid memory in the imagination. But for most of these years, I was working for Gameloft Sofia, where I truly had the opportunity to study and learn from some great game designers and work with them side by side. So right now, I lead a small design team in a newly formed studio called Buro, or as my boss will correct me instantly, it's B12, you idiot. So with our aim is still being able to provide good quality games. Games that are going to be interesting to play, games that are going to be entertaining for you, for people outside, and people around the world. And right now, there is a fantastic opportunity. As I said, we are a newly formed studio. And we're not really ready to reveal anything, but there's going to be a first opportunity to show some screen caps from the game that we're working on, and that's it. No, I'm sorry, I'm just messing with you. I did that just to see the faces on the colleagues there. Honestly, I couldn't show much. I couldn't show pretty much anything. But if you're curious, we have a booth downstairs. So for anyone interested or curious to know more about us or what do we do in some minor detail, come visit us, say hi, we can talk. So, when I entered the industry, I actually started as a QA. And at the time, I didn't pretty much know anything about the game development at all. So for me, this was this mystical shroud in which occasionally some amazing games popped out and demanded my hard-earned money, and very oftenly hours and hours of my attention. And the game development wasn't very popular in the country at the time, so this didn't really help understanding it. And sticking to popular media at the time, or people's opinions, that wouldn't be much help either. People really didn't understand it, as games were more commonly considered a childish activity, a waste of time, and other than maybe a few magazines here and there, or maybe the occasional tiny little spot on TV or some mention somewhere there wasn't much to hear about game development, pretty much. And not long after starting at Gameloft, I had the opportunity to change positions. And at that time, it pretty much started my path into game design. And to be honest, it was properly a difficult path. I was pretty much like the dog there. I had literally no idea what was happening around. There was some people making some stuff and running all around the studio and just doing some amazing shit. And I was like, I'm sorry. Doing some amazing things. Things better than S, whatever. So, but with time, started to grasp more and more, started to learn. And it was more difficult because there was actually no established formal or informal path to follow. So pretty much my experience was gained, my knowledge was gained by experience, learning from other people. or just pretty much reading everything that I can grab my hands onto in the internet, or some books that I could order or read somewhere around. And in Bulgaria, for example, there wasn't any formal education for that. There actually still isn't right now. There are some attempts at this and some minor challenges in some traditional disciplines, but other than that, there is no dedicated facilitation of game designers. So we're pretty much left on our own. During the 80s, when actually digital games began, everybody and their grandmother wanted to get into the entertainment business. And everybody pretty much tried. They created tons of consoles, which I could barely fit into one screen. This was much larger yesterday. I decided to remove something like 20 developers from there. But at the time, it seemed like a very lucrative business. I apologize. Oh, by the way, full disclaimer, that's me at the time. I was kind of invisible, turned visible at some point later on. But going back to it, the game design was often done by programmers while developing on these consoles, because games were much smaller. They were more, let's call it maybe primal. Towards the development of a game, it took a few months and maybe a few guys, 1 to 5 people, and they were doing mix of duties. Programmers who were doing design, they were sometimes doing art or sound, and it was pretty much everyone was doing whatever they actually could to develop the game. Today, it's not the case anymore. With the evolution of the technology, games grew exponentially in scope, in size, in complexity. Production teams grew as well. Developers saw the need to increase their teams. And with that, they started to segment them far more tightly. Programmers focused more on programming these days, and artists on art. And then there was more need for game designers, for the guys to just circle around everybody else and annoy them to hell. So, and the digital games actually provided a huge shift in entertainment sources at the time. It allowed interaction on an unparalleled level unseen before. Before that, people were just used to just see the magical box and the singing box, which is the television, watch movies at the cinema, but they weren't really active to what they were watching. And games changed that pretty much overnight in technological terms. And for that was the bunch of developers and manufacturers trying to get into that business. It became really quickly a very lucrative and very profitable business. And people generally like to play. It's in our DNA. It's a thing that we love to do. It's something that we've done for hundreds and thousands of years, probably since the beginning of humanity. Although, admittedly, some games are being a bit more violent than others, but it was still considered somehow, in some sense, a game. And today, this digital entertainment exactly gives us the opportunity to reenact something that happened thousands or hundreds of years ago and be completely safe in our couch and get fatter and grow beards and do all the things that everybody loves to do, eat chips, for example. And that change brought a lot of money very quickly and developed this industry extremely fast. People enjoyed role-playing. People enjoyed controlling other virtual people to tell them what to do, to tell them what to say. And I suspect a lot of you know what I speak, and I see that in some of your faces. And I'm pretty sure that this talk wouldn't be much of an interest for you. But I was thinking of it more towards people that hasn't been too much into the industry or have interest to get into the industry. And considering I don't see many of these here, maybe I'm just going to talk louder for them to hear downstairs. I don't know. But either interested or not, I've done it already, so let's continue. So going back to game designers, how would I really define game designers today? Not in the 80s, as I was talking just earlier. And I believe that if you go and sit with a bunch of people, like 10 people, and ask them this question and talk to them alone, separately, you're going to hear different answers. And you're going to hear Mostly variation of the same answers, but they will still go different. And that's because, as I mentioned, design is not really, how should I say, formalized. It's not really established as a job position. It's not really established as a thing that people still do. It's relatively new even worldwide. I did say that in Bulgaria there are not many attempts to educate game design. This is not entirely true for worldwide. There are good educational practices in Canada, for example. They educate a lot of game designers, and in the States, but that's still a rarity. If you go to the most country, you wouldn't find qualifications for game designer. And that's the main reason that not everyone is really sure what a game designer is. And that is partially the reason that I was thinking to do this talk. So, but if I go to the, let's say, kind of commonly accepted basics, the generally accepted definition is that designers do create concepts. They create proposals concerning various areas of any game, like game mechanics, character behavior, environment rules, level designs, how a car would lean, how a car would turn, how a car would have doors, how a car would explode if you kick the tires. All these funny things that people like to do when driving a car. And, but does that mean that designers need to be programmers? Not really, not today at least. Most modern game engines, they support various visual scripting languages that doesn't really go into deep to the coding matter, but it would help a designer to know the basic principles of several programming languages, or just to know some languages on its own. Okay, but then does a game designer needs to be an artist? No, not again. It definitely helps, as with programmers, to understand the technology and the tools used by artists, but on its own, it's not really necessary to be one. So how would I define a designer then, if I need to put it in simple terms? I would define it using a bit more established, let's say, medium, and that's cinema. I would define it as a screenplay writer. It's the person that writes the script, or the way of the motion of the movie, that works with the director to improve that, and sometimes with the actors for lines and change of actions. So it's kind of like a interactive screenplay writer. Some of you may agree or disagree, but that's why I'm here on the podium, to give my opinion. So because of that, there is a lot of idealistic intentions felt by people in this line of work. Everybody, because of the presumption that this job is pretty much before everything starts. It's before even technology is selected. It's before a platform is selected. A designer starts working. For example, if you decide to do a survival horror, the designer is going to start working. We want a bit more tactile feeling for survival horror. So we're going to search for a way to make people interact with it with the current platforms. And we're going to pick, let's say, Nintendo Switch. It's a good alternative for that, because they have motion controllers, and they can vibrate, and they can scream at your face when they're close to you. They can do all kinds of things. And that's obviously in conjunction with programming and other aspects of development. But designers are very into development from the very, very beginning. Even before maybe there is a sound artist, sound designer assigned to the team. So because of that, people go into the, let's say, craft, presuming that they're going to create the greatest work in their time. Their games will echo around the industry, and most importantly, it definitely wouldn't suck like the other guys do. So that's not always a good thing. This being a good drive to push people to think outside the box and maybe push beyond established market conventions, we as designers should be always very self-conscious of how the realities presented to us are actually, let's say, combined with our own limitations. Because in order to push our limits, we must first need to know where these limits are and not to run headfirst into a wall. So a designer, one should always be able to listen to criticism and be able and open to change of mind, even on his most favorite topic, as if presented with a good argument from the other side. It's because we're not always right, and that's a fact. And this is the most important lesson that a new or even an old game designer should always know and should always learn. That applies even moreover from other jobs towards game design, because game design is very subjective sometimes. It's extremely subjective. A truth is not truly contained to a single thing. If we made a decision for a game, for some game mechanic, even if not immediately apparent, this is not always the only good working decision. There are always variations, and there are always other opportunities to develop this thing. And sometimes we're literally unable to see that. But this shouldn't sound as a discouragement to people not familiar with the industry. This is just another great challenge that they should take and try to overcome. The designer's job also has evolved a lot with time, and things that was a rule 10 years ago, let's say, are broken pretty much every day today on the market. The market runs with a breakneck pace, and it's constantly changing. Obviously, as it changes, we need to adapt, and not maybe one of the biggest changes for the market was the freemium model and the change of revenue models from, let's say, 10 to 15 years ago. So for those that doesn't know what freemium model is, which is, I imagine, nobody, but still, it's a game that you download for free. You can play it, presumably fully, and you can pay for microtransactions inside this game to gain some content specific for maybe progression or something else. And because of that, designers started caring more about other things, having very catchy acronyms like KPI and DAU and RPPU and MELW. I'm sorry, not that last one. This is not it. But these things are gaining more and more ground into our work. So that's what the acronyms say, stand for. Key performance indicators, daily active users, average revenue per paying users, and a whole bunch of other generally boring things that are more and more important for games these days instead of just the experience of the game. And because of that, I'm sorry. Right, and because of that, the job evolved with it, requiring a bit more technical expertise. And, right, sorry. And for example, in the mobile market, in 2007, everybody thought with the release of the iPhone and the availability of the iPhone and the things that the people were doing with it, everyone was thinking that the iPhone is just the next big thing. Just give it a few more years and it's going to become more powerful than consoles. We're going to play our games on an iPhone and we're just going to throw away our consoles because they're going to be all the same. They're going to have great graphics and going to have great experiences. But as time passed, that didn't really work out. People figured out that it's not very comfortable to play in a tiny screen. And because we have fat, fiddly fingers and the screen weren't very accurate, it was not a very pleasant experience for many of the console games. So today, consoles are still fairly active market, and mobile devices are dominating. So it happened something very curious. Actually, mobile devices started to enforce practices for consoles to adopt from them. And it's not very rare to see microtransactions in AAA games. Games for which you pay full price. And yes, look at you, Ubisoft, wherever you guys are. Here you are, guys. No, I'm just messing with you. You do great games, I applaud you guys. But this behavior were not very common just 10 years ago or 7 years ago. Putting microtransactions in a game or just keeping out content from the game was pretty much an executable offense to players, and they were go into raids to raid the headquarters for that company. Today, that's not even remotely the case. And this was during the modding domination. This is actually Half-Life. There's a strategy mod where the community kept the games alive instead of the developers. developers started learning something very important. They started realizing that games grew more than just a singular experience, created for maybe 7 or 15 or 35 hours of experience and then leaving it aside, that games became a service. They became more than one intended to, and they were supported by the community. Community kept them alive with great mods like this one, which I completely forgot the name right now, but I will definitely figure it out if somebody's curious. And a bunch of other mods like Counter-Strike, which was actually an original mod for Half-Life. So developers kind of wised up to that. And with this, the design job changed a lot. Instead of single-threaded experience, one long experience, one connected thread, we were starting to create more circular experience, more dynamic and looped ones. It was pretty much the core of the freemium model. It's where you go to get a bunch of stuff, to put them in another stuff, to get another stuff, and to put them in the bunch of stuff that you got in the first place. And maybe that I didn't explain it that clearly this time, but it's pretty much a circle of hell from which there is no escape. Premium games are based on the fact that developers are constantly updating the content of the game and maybe some new features here and there, but they don't actually change the basis of it. They don't make any large advancements over the overlaying mechanics that drive the game. And I think that this throws off a lot of people towards the job, that they think that this is not good design. But that is the truth of what market-driven trend. We can try to avoid it, we can try to change it, but we cannot avoid it forever. And many of the developers are actually wising up to it these days. Some freemium games are a decent example of that. For example, Hitman, a AAA title very familiar to most of you, I'm sure. It was a game that was released episodically. I think it's 2016. They released one episode, then they released another for a small byte piece price, then released another for a small byte piece price, and they didn't put the whole load of that game to a single purchase. And after that, they tried to keep it alive as a service. They tried to create a way for players to remain into the game between cycles of these episodes, for them not to escape, delete the game, forget about it, maybe not buy the next one. They created limited time events, which is special daily targets that you go and eliminate. They created various ways to approach every single target. They created multiple targets in every single level to try to keep this game available as a service. And they update this dynamically over the net all the time, or at least they did previously. I'm not entirely certain today. But it's a good example of how a AAA game actually starts to adapting towards a more robust, more circular model of gameplay, towards a way that the game doesn't end when you finish the story campaign. And that story campaign, in Hitman's case, it's still there. But they're trying to tell you, no, the game is not over. We are actually going to put you some small stories into these alternative targets. And we're going to put some other minor stories in the levels themselves. So go figure them out. We're going to add more and more and more with time as time comes. So a few years back, I read an interesting article about a fairly popular mobile studio deciding to pretty much sack all their game designers. They decided we don't need game designers. They're all fired. Everybody says they were fired amicably. I don't know that. Nobody knows that. But they've decided to let go of their design team. So with that, they've moved the design decisions towards the development team itself. And as I've described earlier, the designers are the core of game creation today. That posed an interesting question. To what extent game designers are actually relevant in today's market? And surely enough, obviously, the studio is barely managing, preparing to close doors, fire and brimstone, everything going to hell. But that's not the case. They're doing just fine. They have stable revenues. True, they don't have recently released games, but they moved towards, as I was saying, to creating a game as a service, being constantly updatable, but instead of creating singular, new, more and more products. So, is this experiment a success then? Because they actually survived. Or did they prove that my job can be obsolete and can be done with by a raven with a touch-sensitive pen? That is not really. I mean, sure, it worked for them, maybe to some extent, I'm not entirely certain. But it wouldn't work for many other cases, and that's why the game designer's job is still very important, still very sought through into in the market. They're still searched all over the globe for various positions, and game design being segmented to level design, scripting design, all kinds of designs, which are integral to a specific game development flow for a specific studio, maybe for AAA games or something similar. So the design work is still a very much sought by developers, and it still provides a world of opportunities towards people that want to get invested into it, wants to realize maybe their wildest dream, or at least maybe to try to make, to see what is it to make a game that truly makes someone else happy. So, going back to the earlier questions, because we didn't talk much about animals. And my question was, what kind of an animal a game designer is? I put some animals over the slides. I'm not sure how much of you noticed. And the truth of the answer is that they're humans. Very simple, very plain humans. Excitable, explosive, fearless, emotional, fearful. They're like pretty much everybody else. And intrinsically, every human tries to create something that can be appreciated by other people. We try to please people. Or, okay, that's not the 100% case, but this is the majority. This is what drives humanity forwards. And this is what makes the design job great. This is what makes it a place that people can just go wild on their imagination, or just go wild on what they can actually achieve without even realizing it. So, as the final words, developers, programmers, artists, producers, I know we piss you off, but we do our best, so do forgive us. Thank you.